Hello, I'm Okhar Rizvi, and this is Scope coming to you once again from Toronto, Canada. In today's first segment, we're going to discuss U.S. gun violence, and there has been a shooting in Santa Clarita in California. There have been two students who have been killed in that state by a fellow student in a 16-second gun attack that took place at a school there. Now, this, of course, is, again, a sign that the U.S. is dealing with gun violence at very high rates if compared to the rest of the world. And, of course, all this goes back to the Second Amendment right to be able to carry arms and how sensitive an issue that is for many American citizens. Yet, the U.S. hasn't been able to deal with the situation in a satisfactory manner to be able to stop the sort of violence that we see playing out in schools, universities, and other places across the U.S. There is now a bill seemingly being tabled about dealing with the situation. On the part of the Justice Department has also brought out an initiative about dealing with gun violence, such as background checks and mental health issues being looked into as well. So all of that seemingly moving in the right direction, although with the NRA, the National Rifle Association, looming large, one always, as a U.S. politician, needs to be careful about how much they step forward in that process. Let's discuss all of this a bit further. We're joined now by Matt Snape, who is Executive Director for Parliament Street and a journalist for the Italian publication Inside Over. He's joining us now from Evesham in the UK. Matt, as always, thank you for joining us here. And what do you make of this latest shooting, Matt, there in California, as well as measures to be able to finally try to curb gun violence in the U.S.?
Obviously, any shooting in America is absolutely awful, and my hearts go out to the victims and their families. I think the problem with U.S. gun reform is that it's going to be very difficult to achieve anything fundamental. I think the main problem is that obviously U.S. gun rights are enshrined by the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, and any form of gun control can be seen as a way of stealing Americans' liberties. So I think the best way forward, personally, is for background checks to be carried out by the families of gun owners and police who believe that any individual is capable of going out there and carrying out a mass shooting. I think if the state tries to interfere too much, we're going to have an issue whereby a lot of Americans will feel like their liberty is being threatened.
So I wonder then, why do you think background checks haven't yet been initiated? I mean, gun violence is not a new thing, right, in the U.S. Why do you think it's taken this long? Is it down to essentially the likes of the NRA and the kind of power that they have in the country?
I think the NRA does definitely have a fundamental influence over the way gun control laws are carried out in the U.S. A lot of that is down to the weak lobbying laws in the US. In 2007, the US government passed better lobbying laws to prevent groups from having too much influence over legislation, but unfortunately, it's not been very effective. So I think there's definitely an issue with the NRA. I think the problem with background checks is that, or any form of gun control for that matter, is it's been an outstanding issue in American politics for a long time, and so many different issues have brought on the need, the case for gun control. But I personally believe the best way forward is for families and the police to be able to confiscate guns away from vulnerable individuals who are planning to go out and do a mass shooting. Because, as I say, I just think if the state tries to bring in background checks, it will encroach upon people's liberties. And I think Ivanka Trump was the one who suggested that families and the police should be able to confiscate guns from vulnerable individuals. And I think that's probably the most sensible way forward.
But then logically speaking, Matt, do you think there are simply just too many guns and too many hands in the U.S.? Because, there is even talk on the part of the NRA, I believe, about having people to defend schools then with even more guns in hand. And then, we have stand your ground laws in many states across the United States as well. All of that just means more and more guns in people's hands. I mean, I imagine that at some level that's not a good thing, is it?
Well, I think we've got to remember is that America's population is in the millions. Obviously, like I say, whenever a mass shooting happens, it's absolutely awful, and it should be condemned at every level by politicians of all colours, and I think politicians of all colours should also be united in, trying to bring in something sensible to stop vulnerable individuals from, going out there and doing mass shootings. But I really do think the families and the police of people living in those communities where they're planning to carry out those attacks really is the best way forward. And I just worry about gun control because it'd take the guns away from families and people who are very capable gun owners, and also owning a gun is protected by the Second Amendment of the US Constitution. And I just worry if the US government starts clamping down on people no longer having guns, what else are they going to clamp down on next?
And I wonder then, Matt, if we're looking at this issue of gun violence as a global issue, then, where you're sitting in the UK or other countries such as Australia and the way they've dealt possibly with gun violence, do you think that there are better examples out there about how to deal with the issue of guns on streets?
I think in the UK, in 1996, after the Dunblane massacre, the Conservative government then clamped down heavily on gun violence. But in the UK, there's still 1 million gun owners. I think the problem with the UK and the US is there's huge cultural differences. So, like I say, in the US, you have the right to own a gun enshrined by the Second Amendment. Here in the UK, there's not so much of an issue with, like gun violence. But obviously in the UK, we have the problem with knife crime, and knives can be anything from a really sharp blade to a simple kitchen knife. So, and obviously we can't confiscate people from using knives in this country completely or bring in any form of knife control, because it's really difficult. Because where do you draw the boundary between what type of knife you can use in this country? So it's really difficult. And I think, like I said, the problem with any types of legislation that try to control certain behaviours, they can encroach upon people's liberties elsewhere and lead to the state eroding other people's liberties.
And, the NRA says, Matt, that guns don't kill people, people kill people. That's the famous statement that the NRA spokesmen make all the time. Is that true, do you think?
I think there's definitely there's definitely a lot of reason to believe that people are capable of killing other people, because if they're not using knives, they're not using guns, they'll use their hands instead. There are many ways to kill people. So yes, I do think, and like I say, in the US, there's millions of gun owners. Most of them are responsible gun owners, because you can't condemn a whole population for owning a gun and therefore being irresponsible using a gun. I think it is just a minority of individuals who are ruining it for everyone else. And I believe strongly in the Second Amendment. And whilst I don't believe the most vulnerable people should be entitled to use a gun, I do believe that it should be police and families of the people owning those guns to step in and stop them from carrying out these mass shootings. Because if we start punishing responsible gun owners, then it's sending out a message that the state can steal people's liberties elsewhere as well.
Very well, Matt, we'll leave that as a final word, but of course we get your time today. That was Matt Snape speaking to us from Evesham in the UK. He's Executive Director for Parliament Street and journalist for Italian publication Inside Over. Now, as Matt there put into context, certainly there are many gun owners across the United States who are responsible gun owners. And they, of course, have the right to own guns, personal guns, that is, as well, for the personal safety or otherwise. That is, of course, enshrined, as we know very well, in the U.S. Second Amendment. Nevertheless, this is an issue which is really sensitive because, again, of these sort of school shootings that we've seen just play out in California and Santa Clarita. Does the background checks, as well as the mental health checks, etc., that the Justice Department has proposed, will that go far enough, is the main question. Because certainly all of this is being done under the shadow of the NRA, and the NRA, of course, wields extremely high influence within the U.S. establishment, especially politicians who essentially fear the ground that the NRA walks on because of the power that it wields. Will gun violence finally be dealt with properly? Will children finally be safe in American schools? Will people be safe in American universities or otherwise in their workplaces even? That is a question that remains open at this time. I'll be back with my next segment, though, after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back.